Hey everybody, welcome back to another video, and we're once again back in the combine. Last time you saw me in the combine we were doing wheat, now we're doing rye. Only this time we're doing, we're not using the M3. Dad's bringing the head along using the 175. Well, Alice Chalmers 175 that is. And so we're going to go up here and get ready to roll. I'll bring you along. Alright, got the head hooked on. In order to get into this field, we got to hook on. I just pulled back out on the road. Right there's our corn. I got to back into the entry here of the cornfield. Change gears. Hook on. Then drive down the road about 500 feet. That way I can get pulled into the rye field. And so Dad's got the tractor and the head trailer up here blocking the road. That way I can get down here before any cars show up. So we'll get pulled in up here. We'll be good to go. This does work for a good roadblock though. Alrighty. Well, so far, rye seems good and dry. Dad's already checked it, and of course I got the moisture tester. So once I get out in here, get this end row here opened up, and go down along the corn over there, we'll see what that does. Up and there, I probably can't see it on camera, but right out there's a dumb deer. All they do is eat the corn. Let's see what happens here. I also got my new sickle in from when I broke it there doing wheat, so we're good to go on that. Got the end taken off. Now going down along beside the corn out over here. And I've got a sensor on my straw splitter goofing up, wanting to keep wanting to trip off and on. That gets really annoying. But so far though, not too bad. Rye's pretty heavy. I just creep along through it, only running about 1.2. So, but I don't have my air turned up real high, so I get a pretty a nice clean sample. So that works out pretty good. Okay, got my moisture tester. Gonna jump up in the hopper and grab a quick test. So we'll see what it's like. Well, so far don't look too awful bad. Kind of odd how those grasshoppers can live going through that rooter.
Look decent?
Yeah, not too bad. Grasshoppers can live going through that.
They do.
we're good and dry. I just put seed there on the seed cart, filled up both those boxes, and I still didn't get my hopper empty. So seems to be making pretty good rice, surprisingly. Get turned around here, we'll get going back to the field again. Well guys, the field that you just saw me running in, there on the drone, we got done with that, and so now we're crossing the highway heading south to the next one. So I'll bring you in when we get there and get started rolling. Alright, we're off and rolling. Just picked up over here at the little entry. Kind of an L-shaped field, goes down over here and goes back east up by the woods. So far not too bad from what I'm seeing. Guys, well, we moved from the field where I was just at. You saw me there on some outside footage. Now we're heading down here to the last one. Well, last two little small ones. One's about 1 acre, the other field's about 2 acres. Right over there is the old wheat field. And so maybe I'll try and grab a little more drone footage down here on these on the last two little fields. guys, well, we just got the head dropped off here, back on Dad's truck here on the trailer. So rye harvest 2025 is done. So take care. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time.